Good morning or afternoon, depending on where you happen to be in the virtual world. My name is Dirk Erickson, and I've been asked to give a talk on leadership with a bend towards trust and transparency. And in that vein, I'm going to break a few rules of public speaking and tell you what I'm not going to provide and what I'm not. So what I'm not is I'm not an author who has interviewed 150 leading experts across the country and condensed their words and wisdom into a concise thesis statement or a bumper sticker. Now, I've read lots of what those people have written, and it's all been really good and beneficial. I'm also not a researcher who has mulled over mounds of data, built graphs and charts, trying to tease out the nuances of what leadership is. But I've read lots of those reports, and they've been very instructive. I'm also not a neurologist or a psychologist or any other ist for that matter who has spent a lifetime delving into the operations of the mind or the workings of the human spirit. So if those are the things that you're looking for, I may not be able to provide you much satisfaction today. But what I am is I'm a simple soldier. I have served for 36 years in the United States Army. I spent the first 15 years as an enlisted soldier. And then in 1998, I accepted a commission and converted to the dark side. Since then, I have commanded at the company level, the battalion level, and the brigade level. I've also been a staff officer at the company level, the battalion level, the brigade level, and the division level. And in that time, it's been my responsibility to ensure that the variety of tasks that have been assigned us, and I mean everything from battlefield operations to construction projects, the mundane implementation of simple office procedures, that all of those tasks have been successful. But almost without exception, each and every one of those tasks has been delivered with limited resources, constantly changing goals and objectives, and at times, the stakes have literally been life or death. So if you're interested in how an average guy with an average education has been able to meet those challenges, navigate this chaos, and be successful, all the while building healthy teams, maintaining healthy relationships, and balancing the trifecta of family, work, and social, I will have something to offer you. So let me start by painting a picture or using a metaphor of leadership that I think will help me relay and help you understand what I believe leadership should look like. And then use that picture to convey what General Colin Powell calls the cornerstone of leadership. And that cornerstone is trust. So imagine a shepherd and a flock. I know it's been used 1,000 times, but we'll use it once more. So imagine a shepherd and a flock, and this flock is grazing on a pasture that has been overgrazed. It's time to move. The shepherd has to move the flock to greener pastures, if you will, to ensure the health of the flock. So the shepherd has to go find a new pasture. He's got to find a safe path there. He's got to figure out how to move the flock from where they're at to where they need to be. And he's got to do all this while maintaining the flock as a whole. So at any given time through this entire process, the shepherd's going to be in one of several places. He's going to be forward, looking for new pastures, looking for safe passage, looking for dangers, etc., etc. Or he's going to be in the flock, dealing with the flock, checking on the nuances of the flock, making sure the flock is healthy, making sure the flock is operating like it's supposed to be operating, making sure that all those individuals within the flock are doing what they're supposed to be doing. And then there'll be times when he is outside of the flock, not forward, to the rear, to the sides, and he'll be gathering up sheep that have strayed, sheep that have been left behind for whatever reason, and bringing them back into the flock. So why have I chosen to use sheep and the flock and the shepherd metaphor? Well, whether we believe it or not, we're more like sheep than we care to imagine. Our brains are consumed with survival. It's our default setting. We are constantly scanning our environments for foods, for dangers, and all the while trying to do it while expending as little energy as possible. And that makes perfectly good sense when you consider our ancestors were wandering the Serengetis, trying not to get eaten by saber-toothed tigers and looking for food. So safe, easy, and well-fed, that's what we're looking for. That's how we would love to spend our day. So how do we do that? Well, over time, we've developed these things called habits. And we've developed these habits because they work. Well, most of the time they work. They hadn't gotten us killed yet. We'll leave it at that. But what they do is they allow us to not have to expend enormous amounts of energy on new solutions. And they generally keep us safe. We are creatures of habits. So what does this have to do with trust? Well, another common denominator that we have with sheep is not only are we habitual like they are, we are also extremely social like they are. We like to travel in flocks. We like to hang out in flocks. We like to be around flocks. And it makes a lot of sense because there's great safety in numbers. When you have more eyes looking for dangers and more eyes looking for food, the chances of survival go up exponentially. There is wisdom in numbers. But the system, this flock system, if you will, depends on trust. It depends on us knowing that we can trust the others in the flock with us. And if you don't believe that, either yesterday or today or tomorrow, you will climb into a 1,500-pound vehicle and go hurtling down an interstate, all the while hoping the people in the other lane don't come hurtling into your lane. So it requires this trust inside the flock. And it also requires that the flock can trust its leaders to know that it's being led to greener pastures and not to the den of wolves. All right, so trust is paramount in this whole thing. So where does this trust come from? Well, believe it or not, trust is really our default setting also. You think about a child or toddler. They trust everything. They trust their parents are going to feed them. They trust someone's going to pick them up. They trust that the dog or the pet or the wild animal is not going to hurt them. They live in a perpetual state of trust. That was our default setting. Now, unless you've been jaded by some trauma or something, we generally do not distrust new people in our lives. When I say do not distrust, we have all become skeptical enough through life to not have that benefit or that, I don't even know if it's a benefit, or that to not be able to live in that adolescent state of all in. We've all been hurt. We've all had issues. So generally we don't fully trust, but generally we're open to and willing to accept new people into the flock and new leadership into the flock. And we will give them the benefit of the doubt until we don't. So we know that we are driven by survival. We know that we are social creatures. We know that we are generally predisposed to trust. We understand that trust is critical to this whole social fabric mechanism sticking together. So you would think that there's got to be some kind of natural law, a chemistry, a rule, or something that supports, that holds up, that keeps in place, that builds this trust that we are so dependent upon. Something this critical has to have something in support of it. And what the researchers have found is that, in fact, there is a biochemical, a chemical molecule that really kind of lubricates this whole trust process. And the molecule is called oxytocin. And it's really a stress inhibitor. But what it allows to take place is it allows you, or allows us, or anyone for that matter, to develop or to achieve empathy for others. And as it turns out, empathy is kind of the cursory requirement for trust. Empathy being understanding other people's emotions or relating to other people's emotions or feelings. You know, when you're stressed, and the psychologists have shown this, that when we're stressed, we cannot develop deep levels of trust. We typically, we migrate back to that fight or flight. We go back to old survival habits, but we don't develop deep trust. But when oxytocin is released into your body or into your brain, it blocks those stress molecules, things like cortisol, and allows you to enter a relaxed state or an empathetic state, which allows you to start building trust or garnering trust from others. So there's some things, well, let me say this first. And let me talk about empathy just for a second. So empathy is not a requirement for trust. It helps. Empathy is like the lubricant that kind of greases the cogs and the wheels and the chains of the trust system. Not a requirement, but it definitely helps. So are there some things that we can do to encourage this empathy, this release of oxytocin? Turns out there absolutely are. And they're pretty simple things that we probably naturally will relate to. Things like appropriate touch, handshakes, high fives, in today's COVID world, an elbow bump, eye contact, interactive conversation, laughter. All of these things are catalysts for the release of oxytocin. And here's the crazy thing about this whole trust cycle oxytocin mechanism. It's compounding. It's cyclical. It builds on itself. So you have a release of oxytocin that leads to higher levels of empathy, which leads to greater trust. And trust is a huge catalyst of oxytocin. So it brings you right back to the beginning, and you get caught in this loop of increasing trust. So what does this have to do with our shepherd and his hungry sheep? Well, he still has to move them from the field that they're in to greener pastures. And he basically has two methods to do this. He can use fear, or he can lead them. The fear model is extremely resource intensive. It also tends to scatter the flock. Fear is not something, you can't use fear to draw things to you. Fear pushes things away. Fear has to drive things to a place. And the problem with that is that to drive the flock, the shepherd has to be in the rear of the flock. And if he's in the rear of the flock, then he can't be forward looking for dangers. He can't be forward making sure that that green pasture is still a green pasture. He can't be forward making sure that the flock is moving efficiently through whatever obstacles the path lie in the path. So if he's doing this all from behind, if he's pushing, if he's using fear, the chances of the flock dispersing and losing, those key traits of many eyes and many ears for safety and looking for food, that wisdom in numbers is lost if you got the shepherd in the back of the flock trying to push them forward. So fear is typically not the best way to go. Sometimes fear is a great way to move a team, to motivate a team. I'm not saying it's never appropriate. Danger, life or limb. Sometimes fear is a great way to motivate a team to move in the right direction. But typically, it's extremely resource intensive and not very productive. So what's the other option? The other option is to lead them. The other option gets rid of all those negative possibilities that are associated with the fear model. The leading model really plays into who we are as people, who we are as humans, what we like, what we're drawn to, what we appreciate. We want to be led. It's as simple as that. So how does the shepherd do this? Well, it starts first with being competent at being a shepherd or a leader. And that sounds a little backwards, that you have to be something before you can become that thing. But to be a leader or be a shepherd means that you have to be open and willing to learn. I'm not saying you have to be a perfect or an expert leader. Matter of fact, those things don't exist. The perfect leader doesn't exist. There are very few people that I would consider expert leaders. Most of us are just good leaders, trying to get through. But it's those moments of not being perfect and of not being excellent that provide some amazing opportunities to build trust. We love an underdog. We are drawn to people who struggle forward. We trust deeply people who we know have had to struggle to gain what they know or can do. We just trust those people. We know what they've been through. We appreciate what they've been through, and therefore we trust them. And that all sounds a whole bunch like empathy, because that's what it is. Because we identify in them, or identify with something in them that we can see in ourselves, and that empathy starts rolling, and that oxytocin starts getting developed, and we start getting drawn in to that trust. And the same thing happens for them, drawn towards us. It all kind of plays in and works together. So being the expert or being a perfectionist as a leader is typically detrimental to the effort of team building. Now, does this mean you can just go around and not know what you're doing? No, it means that you have to go and learn from other shepherds. You've got to learn from the flock, learn from the sheep, understand the flock, understand the sheep. You have to, let me think of a way to describe it. I would call it humble effort. It means you have to have the ability to have an open mind to understand. Well, let me take a step back. It's a humble effort. And when I say humble here, I'm not talking about timid. I'm not talking about being timid at all. I'm talking about courageous. I'm talking about having courage. I'm talking about the courage to listen to others, the courage to learn from others, the courage to integrate other ideas into your plans. That's the humble effort that I'm talking about here. The Army says that leaders need an adaptable mind. And what they mean by an adaptable mind is someone who is first open-minded, who second appreciates diversity of perception, who appreciates the perceptions that others bring to a conversation or a dialogue, that they aren't prone to jump to conclusions, that they're not hesitant, they're not sitting on their laurels, but they're not just running after the first easy solution that they think is out there. Someone who's willing to accept risk, and someone who's resilient, someone who's able to come back from setbacks, to overcome adversity, if you will. These are all things that the leader has to balance and do, along with the enormous assortment of other intangibles that are out there, things like charity and justice and self-discipline. All of these things play into the development of that leader. But almost all of those things are things that the leader's doing, even though he may be getting help from the outside, he's doing internally to build himself into that person or that entity that can be trusted. The next thing he's got to look at is he's got to start understanding the individual sheep. And this is really the messy work of building relationships. This is probably the most difficult task of leadership, is building those relationships, understanding what makes a sheep move forward, what makes a sheep move backwards, what makes a sheep drive forward, what makes a sheep paralyzed, what moves them, what motivates them to be an important contributing member of the flock. It's critical that the leader understand how to best place the sheep within the flock. Some are going to be exceptional at leading and getting out front. Some are going to hold to the back of the flock. Some are going to move in and around within the flock. But the leader has to understand how each of those individual sheep fit into the flock. It's difficult, it's time consuming, but it goes back to those core things that we talked about earlier. It goes back to a lot of those things that we talked about for building empathy. It goes back to open and honest dialogue. It goes back to listening before speaking. Leaders speak last. There's a book out there by a guy by the name of Simon Sinek. It says, leaders eat last. Well, leaders should speak last also. It gives those sheep the opportunity, it gives those individuals or members of the team an opportunity to feel as though their thoughts, their concerns, their ideas, all of those things are important. And when they start feeling that sense of belonging, when they start feeling that sense of trust from above, that their ideas matter, then they start offering that trust to others around them. And all the while we're building these relationships, we have to be extremely conscious that we're keeping these relationships properly ordered. Nothing will undermine a team or a flock faster than disordered relationships, whether it's between the shepherd and a sheep, whether it's between the sheep themselves, whether it's between portions of the sheep and the shepherd. All of these things, all these disordered relationships undermine the very fabric of the flock or the team as a whole. Leaders are often required to make difficult decisions. And when it's time to make those decisions, these disordered relationships will cloud and muddy the process. and it's highly likely that the leader will choose poorly. And what's at stake at these times is the absolute trust of the flock, of the unit, of the team. So all the while you're working at, striving at, daily digging in and trying to build these relationships, you have to make sure that you're doing it in a manner that keeps them all ordered, that makes sure that justice and charity and temperance are all out there and all being utilized, being demonstrated, being set as values, goals, and beliefs for your team, for your flock. And once those relationships have started to develop, the next step the shepherd has to do is he has to take a step back and he has to evaluate the flock the same way he evaluated and assessed the members of the flock. Because the flock as a whole will have a personality. The flock will have a habit. The flock will have a predisposition to environments or to attitudes or to movements. So it's critical that the shepherd takes the time to understand all those relationships within the flock. Is there a sheep that moves forward first? Is there a sheep that motivates or influences, is probably a better word. Is there a sheep that influences the overall flock? Whether that's a good influence or a bad influence, knowing which sheep or those sheep is critical. Understanding how the flock reacts to fear, how it reacts to stress, how it reacts to fatigue, how it reacts to hunger, how it reacts to whatever. Understanding those things is critical for the shepherd to understand, to ensure that he can build a plan that really is based in the strengths and not the weaknesses of the flock. The shepherd needs to understand what the flock does when the shepherd's not around. He needs to understand what those habits are that the flock will resort back to, regardless of the environments, regardless of the pressures, regardless of all those external factors. What are the habits of the flock? And lastly, the shepherd has to constantly be evaluating the environment and ensuring that the flock is safe, that the flock is secure, that the flock is being fed, is being nurtured, and being groomed. So all of these things the shepherd has to be engaged in. And all of them are important. All of them build trust. All of them provide the sheep with the security of knowing that the shepherd is there for their benefit. It's this developed trust that gives the shepherd the confidence that when a danger is identified or a new direction has to be taken or something new has to be accomplished, that the flock will move to the commands. The flock will follow the directions, that the flock will go in the right direction. It also allows the flock to know that when and if it identifies a danger or has a need or has a concern, the flock or the unit knows that it's in its best interest to include the shepherd into that conversation, into that dialogue, into that situation. So we've spent a lot of time talking about trust and building trust. And I will tell you that that one of the best tools that I have used over the years with all the teams that I've had the good fortune to be associated with is transparency. I mean, it's a magical elixir. It is a concoction that, when first consumed, is bitter to the taste and uncomfortable to the ego. But it's amazing the restorative and healing properties that it has. You know, if I am being open and transparent with my teams, they are extremely generous with their forgiveness. And when I'm not being transparent, they have been extremely stingy with their forgiveness. You know, if I tell somebody I'm tired, almost inevitably, one of my team members would come up with a word of encouragement. If I've said, I don't really understand how to do this. Within moments, somebody is offering to help. The more transparency that I exhibit, the greater response I get from the team. The more they see me as human, the more willing they are to participate with me. Earlier I talked about not having to be perfect, not having to be an expert. And it's in those moments when, when you're sharing your fears and your concerns and your inadequacies with the team, that the team really begins to feel that empathy towards you, which allows you to start building that trust with them. I can't tell you the number of times that a member came to me and said, "Hey, this is going bad," or "This is going wrong," or "These are the results we're getting." And when we went back and looked at the situation, looked at the process, looked at all the variables, how many times we found that it wasn't the team member who messed up. It was the process. It was the process that was flawed. And had that team member not felt empowered to come forward, then the process would still be messed up. We would still be producing poor outcomes and still thinking it was individual effort and not the process. The other great thing about transparency is it works up the chain also. I can tell you. On a regular basis, I go to my boss and say, "Hey boss, I messed this up, and these are the things that I'm thinking about doing to correct it." And almost inevitably, not every time, but almost every time, that conversation turns into a mentorship, a dialogue, problem-solving conversation that ends with my boss having greater confidence in me because we had this conversation. Now, occasionally, it has not gone that way. I'll be honest. Occasionally, that self-reporting hurts. But 9 times out of 10, it ends much better. It ends in a way that builds, supports, and encourages a mutual trust between you and the boss, or you and your team. And it's that mutual trust that gives you, or that provides you, that flexibility to make decisions on the move. If the boss knows he can trust you, if the teams know they can trust you, if they trust in what you're doing, then when you make a decision, they will give you the latitude to chase it, to follow it, to move in that direction. Recently I had the unfortunate responsibility of doing an investigation within a unit in our ranks where the command team had disintegrated, literally disintegrated. No one was hurt, but it was a complete and utter mission failure. One of the members of the command team decided to give the other member of the command team an article on toxic leadership. And I know that sounds horrible. And it was horrible. And it was not well thought out. But what led up to that moment in time, what led to that point in time is interesting. The weeks leading up to it, the unit was preparing for a major inspection, and the commander had taken on this sense of responsibility that I'm in charge, not that I'm responsible, that I have to get it fixed, that I have to give direction, that I. And he had, over the weeks leading up to this moment in time, had basically ostracized the rest of the unit. He had stopped listening. He had stopped taking in their perspectives. He had stopped paying attention to the comments, the concerns, all of those things, so that when this moment in time occurred and the individual gave him this article on toxic leadership, he lost it. And within moments, literally, like within an hour, the unit had been fractionalized along two clearly defined lines. And then rumor control took over. And before you knew it, all of the trust in the organization had just evaporated into the ether. And the crazy thing is, it could have been avoided. I honestly believe that it could have been avoided had that leader taken the time to listen. Because what the unit was perceiving was that the commander was an elitist, that the commander didn't trust them, that the commander thought they weren't skilled enough to do their jobs. And none of those, or all of those, were as far from the truth as you can imagine. The commander never had any of those intentions. But because he had this valiant, if you will, sense of responsibility that he was going to move this unit forward, and that he was responsible, and that he could do it, and that he had a solution, the rest of the unit was left feeling separated. And perception, at the end of the day, rules the day. The perception was that he was an elitist. Was he? No. The perception was he didn't trust him. Did he trust them? Yes. The perception was he didn't care about or didn't understand them. Was any of that true? No. But the perception was there. And I will tell you that the mission failed miserably. The unit was completely demoralized, and the leadership had to endure the public humiliation of an extremely intrusive investigation. So let me end by saying this. Leadership is not rocket science. And most of the time, it's as simple as leading sheep to greener pastures. But if the shepherd is not being attentive to the sheep, is not aware of the tendencies of the flock, is not building, establishing, repairing, and nurturing trust, then it's highly likely that the flock's going to fail. And it's even extremely likely that the flock won't survive. Thank you. Have a great day.